Namaskar to all of you. This is a series that we are doing on Sri Aurobindo's text, Synthesis of Yoga. And in our previous talks, we have acknowledged the presence, a deep presence of this unconditional love within all of us, a feeling, a sense of abundance, a sense of oneness and ease. And this deep center is connected to the eternal source of wisdom, truth, and our purpose and outflowing of action in our day-to-day life. And this talk and this chapter, which is called as self-consecration, is about devoting or consecrating our whole being to this divine deep center within us. When we look up at the meaning of consecration, nowadays we do it in Google rather than a dictionary. But the meaning that emerges for consecration word is a kind of a something with sacred, whether we may call it an association with sacred, or one may call it a complete devotion to the sacred. So it is devoting our entire being, our whole being, to this sacred divine center within all of us. And this chapter is about the whys and hows of a complete and effective self-consecration. And here the word complete and effective is important, because one may say that I consecrate my whole being to the divine, all my actions, all my thoughts, all the ambitions, all the purposes in life, I consecrate it to the divine. But if this is just happening at a thought level, and our actions and our day-to-day life, our emotions are still running in the same pattern, then maybe that consecration is not so complete and effective. And this is the point that Sri Aurobindo tries to share with us through these lines. The mere idea or intellectual seeking of something higher beyond, just the intellectual seeking of something beyond our day-to-day existence, however strongly grasped by the mind's interest. The mind might be very interested and might strongly be even obsessed with that idea, is ineffective unless it is seized on by the heart as the one thing desirable, until it becomes that one thing desirable for our heart, and by the will as the one thing to be done. For the truth of the Spirit has not to be merely thought, but to be lived. And to live it demands a unified single-mindedness of the being. To understand this with an example, if we imagine our life as a rowing boat with a group of rowers sitting in the boat, if it is just the intellectual interest or mind's curiosity in it, then it is more like one part of the boat rowing in one direction, and then there is an opposite direction of the heart and will rowing in opposite direction. And what happens is that the boat just goes back and forth. It is only when all the members of the boat become aware of this and move together forward in one direction is that the boat moves forward swiftly with single-mindedness. And today's topic is all about how does one create that capacity for this unified single-mindedness within ourselves. If we look at it, for this understanding of this single-minded, unified single-mindedness within us, what really is required can be understood by taking a balcony view towards the spiritual journey of any human being. When we start initially on the journey, we are largely busy in our mundane, ordinary daily life. And for some, there is a sudden overpowering influence of the divine, or there might be an strong prarabdha or a strong past life reserve of yogic actions, and they are suddenly put on the path and their feet are firmly set on the path of yoga. But for many others, and often for many individuals, it doesn't start that way. It is initially maybe starts by the path of religion or by some philosophy, or as we discussed, by some mental curiosity or intellectual interest. For many others, it is a kind of an admiration of some individual who is consecrated to the divine, an admiration towards them, whether they are very close to them or we see them around from distance. For many others, we pick up some form of yoga, or we have some little experience in our life which creates this whole curiosity to move towards the divine. But if we see that what this largely represents is a kind of a divine touch initially on a soul, or an initiation towards the path of yoga. It is like the people, the rowers in the boat, have looked at the possibility of a new destination. They may not all agree to it, but there is some effort towards moving forward on that direction. And this is largely the preparatory phase on the path of yoga. And in this preparatory phase on the path of yoga, the duration can be very long. It may take lifetimes altogether. And this was a question asked by Arjuna from Lord Krishna, that what if I am not successful in my efforts in finding thee? And Lord Krishna reassures Arjuna that no effort on the path of yoga goes waste. If you are unable to move forward in this life, all your efforts will be bearing fruits in next life also. You will find yourself in a conducive environment to move forward towards the next step from where you have left. So this preparatory phase may be very long, but if we really want to succeed on the path of yoga, one has to be clear about the secret of success on the path of yoga. And what is that secret is described by Sri Aurobindo through these lines, one of the most commonly read lines from Sri Aurobindo's texts. The secret of success in yoga is to regard it not as one of the aims to be pursued in life. So it is not one of the aim, but as the one and only aim. Not as an important part of the life, but as the whole life. These are some very beautiful and deep words. But there is a very important catch here in the preparatory phase for us. Because very often what yoga represents to us is that, okay, I will do my reading of a spiritual text for an hour every day, or I will sit in meditation or do yoga for 1 hour a day, and rest of my day I pursue the material goals in my life and find a nice balance between the two of them, and I have very nicely balanced my material life and my spiritual life. But who is that I which is balancing the material life and spiritual life is important. If that I is ego, which is at the center, that ego in us which is seeking more of its personal gain, the nature of ego is division. It seeks personal gain and it is quite easily influenced. And our inner universe and our outer universe is full of these habits and influences which can drift the ego away from that one spiritual aim. And this line that whole life is yoga and yoga is one aim of life may not last for too long. It is like the boat being led by a leader which is focused and thinking only about himself. What do I want in life? Rather than thinking about the whole boat and towards the destination. So the intent of one aim in life and whole life being yoga may not transpire in that fashion. What is called for is for Krishna to take the lead of the boat. What is called for is for there to be a deeper center than this I which is trying to play the balancing act of material and spiritual life. For there to be a deeper center which is born, which is in unison with the divine, which seeks the divine. And from that deeper space, whether it is an act of communion or unity of the divine in quietude, or it is an expression through our actions in our daily life, they both are one and the same. So the material and the spiritual goals of life become one from that space. And that is where the true meaning of all life is yoga, and yoga is the one and only aim that we seek in our life, can truly transpire. And to describe this, Sri Aurobindo writes, the first necessity is to dissolve that central faith and vision in the mind, which concentrate it on its development and satisfaction and interests in old externalized order of things. The mind is concentrated on the outside. It is imperative to exchange this surface orientation for the deeper faith and vision which see only the divine and seek only after the divine. So the words development, satisfaction and interest are key here. Normally the mind and the I believes that my satisfaction lies outside, my whole development lies outside. But the truth is that the true contentment of the mind also lies deep within. And the true, if the mind really wants to develop itself to its full potential, then that source of potential also lies deep inside. There is a very nice line from one of the great philosophers in the history of mankind, Socrates, that if we are seeking something outside as a source of satisfaction, there are three possibilities that might happen. One is that we may not get that thing, and in that case we will experience suffering. The other possibility is that we get something else in place of that thing, and again as an individual we suffer for not having that thing that we were looking for. And the third possibility is that we do get that thing which we were looking for, which we were seeking, but then again there is suffering because we want to hold on to it. We don't want to let go of it. And this is an important thing to understand, and the mental and the intellectual being within us needs to emerge at a clarity of this, that if we are looking for that long-lasting happiness, the source is within. It is deep within us. And then the next important thing that Sri Aurobindo talks about, once we have understood this and we have created this center of faith and vision within us, the next need is to compel our whole being to surrender, to devote itself to this divine center of faith and vision. If we look at it, our whole being, it is made of different parts. There are our senses, there is our mind, there is our vital. So it is important to acknowledge each of these parts and compel them to devote to this new center of vision that has been created within our being. And then when we start acting, again these parts of the being get scattered, and one has to constantly call them back to this same center and remind oneself. And Sri Aurobindo here quotes Upanishads, that it is this which is the divine Brahman and not the one which men adore here. And this is important to do because, fine, we have understood this fact that the long-lasting happiness is within us, but what about others around us? The family, the boss, the whole collective consciousness of humanity. They may not agree with us. So it is important to acknowledge this fact and accept it, and turn whatever is under our own influence more and more inwards towards this divine center within us. But then when we start having this discussion, there are two key questions which emerge in front of us. Does that mean that our outer life, what we are leading, is to be rejected in form of something which means suffering? Is it a world of suffering? Is it a world of illusion and maya? Are we to lead the life of an ascetic which leaves this world and lives in seclusion? Or to describe it in one line, is there to be an exclusive concentration on the divine in our life? This is one of the most common shortcuts, or the first shortcut which has been taken in the path of yoga for thousands of years. Because the aspiring soul has understood that the long-lasting happiness and what I truly seek is within, the simple solution that emerges is to reject whatever is outside. And in process, one may choose to live alone in a jungle, or one may choose to live in an ashram where there are like-minded people, and largely there is an exclusive concentration on the divine. And whatever actions or whatever energies that are present within the being, they are largely quietened, and only whatever is necessary for the basic survival of a person and for the spiritual seeking is still kept alive. But Sri Aurobindo says that on the path of integral yoga, a sadhak is debarred from taking such a simple, he calls it a simple solution, yet a strenuous solution. It is not as, although it is simple, but it is not easy. Even this path is full of its own difficulties, and it's a strenuous path. But he debars us as those sadhaks who are on the path of integral yoga, who choose to be on this path, from taking this solution, because the life has to be accepted. Our outer life has to be accepted as a half-veiled manifestation of the divine. A manifestation of the divine where divine is hidden partially and partially manifest, which is undergoing a progressive transformation. And we can contribute to that transformation. There's a very nice line from Mother about yoga and meditation, that yoga and meditation is not about being alone in a forest. It is about accepting whatever circumstances that grace has given us and being alone with the divine within us. So not alone in the forest, but being alone with the divine within, accepting whatever circumstances that the grace has given us. So Sri Aurobindo calls out for accepting the half-wheeled manifestation of the divine and contributing to the progressive transformation of this manifestation by maintaining more and more focus on this central faith and vision and expressing it more and more by attuning our will with the divine will. And this divine will to which we attune is not something which is focused on the outcome or what is happening or what is going to come out outside, but it is more focused on the question that what is the identity we take in our actions. Is it that we take up the identity of being this physical body, or we take up the identity of being this mind, or we take up the identity of being a spark of the spirit, a divine being? The higher and more evolved identity we take, the more likely are we to attune with that divine will. The second question that one may ask oneself is, what is the purpose behind the action? Is it to do what is urgent in my life right now? Is it to maintain the survival? Or the purpose is to do what is important in the present moment? Is it to find the most soulful and important purpose that one can figure within oneself? And then one may ask, what is the plan that I bring forward in my day-to-day life? Is it a life which is lived on reacting to every moment the way it comes? Or is it a well thought out, soulful, reflected plan that I move forward with every day of the life? Sri Krishna in Bhagavad Gita mentions at one of the places that for those who seek success in life, I am in the plan, or I am in the niti. And so those who wish for success in life, even for them, it is important to worship the plan, to create the most, to receive the most beautiful plan for day-to-day life and execute it to the best of their ability. There's another beautiful line that one little action done out of the insight is much more profound and useful than 100 actions done at a very spinal and a reactive level. And this is very important for us to understand, because one may again say, oh, I am attuned to the divine will, but what does divine will represent? It is through these little things which we reflect upon and bring in to our focus every day that we can actually attune more and more to the divine will. It is easy to say, talk about that, yes, we create a deeper center of faith and vision, but when it comes to action and an outpouring of that divine center, these little things being planned and put forward in our day-to-day life allows us to feed that deeper center within us. So this is one common question which emerges out of whether it is an exclusive concentration or it is a more inclusive concentration which includes life. The other common question that comes in when we say that we compel all parts of our being to devote itself to the divine is an understanding of what all does a human system comprise of. We have our senses, we have this mind, we have a heart full of emotions, there is this physical body, there is the prana which constantly seeks desires and satisfaction, there is a will of actions, there is an ego, there is a soul. So many different parts to our being, and the nature of each part is that it has its own complex individuality, and it almost acts independent of the other. And Sri Aurobindo describes it in almost an amusing and an overwhelming way, that it neither agrees with itself nor it agrees with other parts of the beings. So it's like being in a boat where neither do each of the rower have full clarity on where they want to go, nor do they agree with other rowers. So what will eventually happen is that the boat will not move forward, and it will largely be dragged and drifted in the waves of the river or waves of the water. And that is what commonly happens to us. We get flown away in the waves of the thoughts and the primary emotions in the collective consciousness of the humanity, whether it is the wave of a particular fashion, or whether it is the wave of the COVID, whether it is the wave of the 19th century, 20th century, 21st century. And to deal with this complexity of our being, again, a second common shortcut has emerged in the different schools of yoga, and that shortcut is to pick up one of the instruments or one of the parts of our being and master it completely, purify it completely, and use that as a source of communion with the divine, and quieten less of the parts of the being. For example, in Bhakti Yoga, it is the heart full of emotions which is purified and devoted entirely to the divine, and the mind and the rest of our being is quietened. Whereas in Jnana Yoga, the heart is quietened, and it is the mind and the intellect which takes the center stage, and it is transformed and enlightened with the divine, but the rest of the being is quietened. Here again, Sri Aurobindo comes in and debars us from taking such a simplistic solution. It may be one of the events or a part of the journey on our long spiritual journey that we may choose to do this, but not represent it as our entire journey of yoga. Because just like we see life as a half-wheel manifestation of the divine, even these different parts of the being are to be seen as instruments of the divine realization and manifestation. It is through each of these instruments of the divine that we realize the divine, and also it is each of these instruments which is the source of our manifestation of what is to be done on the journey. So each of these instruments is to be understood properly. It is to be clarified. A new divine center is to be created in all of these parts of our being. And then it doesn't end here. It is not just about purifying each part of the being. It is also about harmonizing all of them with each other, because what we just talked about, that neither do they agree with themselves nor do they agree with the other part. To take an example, the vital or the pranic part in us might say that, oh, I am tired of working, I need a holiday, I want to relax. But the intellect or the buddhi within us may say that I am the divine servant, I work endlessly and tirelessly for the divine. And it seems a very valid argument. But the vital may come back and say that, well, I need to relax and rejuvenate if I have to work. If I go on a holiday, I might experience different points of views. I open myself up. To this conflict, there cannot be an arbitrary solution. One may not say that, okay, we were planning for a 4-day holiday, let's make it 2 days to make the intellect happy. But there has to be a natural solution which emerges by having the divine at the center, and each of these parts of our being restoring the communication between each other. There being a complete synchronization and balance, a beautiful communication, synchronization and balance, a kind of an orchestra which is centered around the lead, the divine within us. And for that, Sri Aurobindo uses the words, he has to harmonize the deliberate knowledge with unquestionable faith. He must conciliate the gentle soul of love with formidable need of power. So the deliberate knowledge or the jnana within has to be balanced with a deep faith. If we just become knowledge centered, then our life becomes in a way attached to knowledge. But there has to be an element which is beyond knowledge, beyond what we know, whatever we have perceived, and that is faith. So knowledge has to be balanced with faith. A gentle love has to be balanced with a strong power. The passivity of the soul that lives content in the transcendent calm has to be fused with the activity of the divine helper and the divine warrior. So that Raj Yogic transcendent calm where one lives in communion of the samadhi has to be balanced with the karma yoga, or being that divine helper or that divine warrior. So different parts of our being harmonized and balanced all together. So overwhelming is this task that Sri Aurobindo reminds us. First, for the first shortcut, by avoiding the first shortcut, which is to reject life but yet accept life, our life does become more and more rugged. Our path of spirituality does become more and more rugged. But eventually, the life becomes our helper on the way. And this is relatively simple to understand by the theory of karma. If you reject something, that thing is going to reject you back. If you reject life, the life is going to reject you back. But if you accept life as a half-wheel manifestation of the divine and choose to be an instrument for uplifting of life, eventually life will come back and accept you and contribute to uplifting the path of yoga for the one individual. And eventually what happens is that every action that an individual takes becomes as food for that sacrificial fire within us, and with every ahuti or with every action or with every experience, we progress further on the path of yoga than being stuck and moving back and forth. So that is the advantage that we eventually gain on this rugged path, that the life becomes our helper. And by avoiding the second shortcut, by embracing, accepting, and exceeding every instrument that is a part of a human system, we again gather an advantage that it is a more wholesome journey, and we become a beautiful instrument for the divine manifestation on earth. But then again, a third challenge in front of the yogi is that we, with these instruments of human system, are not just a separate system. We are constantly under the influence of a lot of visible and invisible influences. It is that rowing boat which is under the influence of all the weather and all the waves of the water, the wind, and the fellow boats. Same way in our day-to-day life, we are under the influence of our peers. We are under the influence of the family and a lot of invisible influences around us. The world was a much simpler place 100 years back when there was no advertising. And when the advertising industry came in, they transformed the fact, the truth that we are all unique in ourselves to the fact that we are all special. We are more important than others, and it has been subconsciously feeding this part of our ego, that special self within us, and selling us stuff. So there is this visible influence on us, there is this subtle invisible influence on us, and then there is an influence coming from beyond, from subtle spheres on us. So this is another third challenge, and here also a yogi on the path of integral yoga accepts this challenge. And that is why, as Sri Aurobindo writes, that this representative character gives them a much more obstinate capacity of resistance, an almost endless right to recurrence. Since we have taken up this rugged path, there is almost an endless right to recurrence, and one needs to accept it, that will keep recurring. Often he finds that even after he has won persistently his own personal battle, so we have gained some degree of triumph, we have transformed our own life. So we have won persistently our own personal battle. He has still to win it over and over again in a seemingly interminable war, because his inner existence has already been so much enlarged that not only it contains his own being with its well-defined needs and experiences. So it becomes an interminable war because our inner existence is now no more limited to us. As we keep going forward on the path of yoga, our own inner existence expands with the beings of others, because in himself he contains the universe. So within us gradually is contained the whole universe. Buddhism has some beautiful descriptions of spiritual journey on various frequencies of the soul as it moves forward on the path of spiritual journey, which is pretty much in alignment with what Sri Aurobindo has just described here, that a soul starts from the frequency of aham, where I am concerned about myself. If you are here to tell me about my flaws, please go away. So the soul initially finds itself centered on aham. As it moves forward, takes those little steps forward, it moves into swayam. And when it moves into swayam, it starts to see all these flaws within oneself and all the disharmony within one's being. And as it sees this disharmony, it has that aspiration or that burning fire which starts. It starts seeking solutions outside, inside, everywhere around. And as the soul grows and the feet are more and more firmly set on the path of the yoga, then the soul moves into the third frequency, which is the frequency of dhvani, where now one can help oneself and through their words can become the source of impacting others. So, as if in a medical college or in a college, like we have interns, you have had some degree of medical education. Now you are in a position to help patients and execute what the more experienced doctors have to say. So the soul reaches a place of dhvani. But it doesn't end here. It keeps moving forward, and there comes a point that the inner existence goes on expanding and the service becomes greater than self. So one becomes united with the whole universe, and that is the frequency of sansar. And that is what Sri Aurobindo is referring to here. The whole, in himself, he contains the universe. And finally, the fifth frequency of being a pure Atman. And with this progressive transformation of a being, the process of self-consecration becomes complete and effective. The complete and effective self-consecration. So to summarize the key insights and actionables from our talk today, the first is something for us to ponder upon and reflect. Are we seeing yoga as an intellectual interest in our life? Do we want the life to go back and forth and just take little steps on the path of yoga? Or are we willing to take the boat forward swiftly towards the destination by making yoga that one and only aim in our life and our whole life? The second thing to reflect upon is to be vigilant. Is it the ego or the I which is playing the balancing act in our life of balancing the material and the spiritual life? Are we content with that? Or we wish to create that deeper center of faith and vision within us, from where whatever we do, everything is towards that one spiritual goal, that one divine seeking in our life. The third point of reflection for us is that if that aspiration is burning and the first two things are already in place, there is a divine faith, there is an aspiration. Are we aware of the full complexity of our being? Do we understand the different aspects of our being? Do we have a plan on how do we transform, how do we purify, how do we acknowledge and honor each instrument of the divine within us and transform it?